What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to the beginning of Unit 3 on the Industrial Revolution. Hopefully at some point you've learned about the Industrial Revolution. Sometimes people say it sounds a little boring. Just hearing Industrial Revolution doesn't sound like the most exciting thing. We'll do our best to kind of keep it fun with some interesting stories and whatnot. But when we talk about revolution, remember, we're talking about a big change. When we talked about the French Revolution, we're talking about the overthrow of the government. When we talked in Global 1 about the Neolithic Revolution, we were talking about a change from when everyone hunted and gathered to the shift to farming. And a lot of people think that this revolution, the Industrial Revolution, is just as important as the Neolithic Revolution, if not more important. So what is the Industrial Revolution? Basically, we're seeing a shift from most people in the world who are going to farm for their living. So for example, in the French Revolution, we talked about peasants who were farmers making up like 80 to 85% of the population in France. After the Industrial Revolution happens and it has come to completion or fruition, we're going to see most people who are going to be working in a factory or office job. So for example, today, if you think about the people that you know, odds are you don't know anyone who is a farmer for a living. You might know a couple people, especially out here on the East End, but for the most part, you probably don't know people who farm for their livelihood. If you lived in the 1700s, almost everyone you knew, for the most part, would be a farmer. So this is kind of the shift that happens as a result of the Industrial Revolution. So the big question is, how in the heck does this happen, and what goes on to make this happen? So the first thing that causes the Industrial Revolution is the people of Europe actually have what's called an agricultural revolution. And agriculture just means farming. And there's this big shift in farming in the 1700s in Europe, where first people in Europe just gain access and better knowledge of farming techniques, how to rotate their crops. So my picture here is part of a crop rotation where you don't farm the same land year after year. You let the land recover and the soil recover, and you don't plant on that for a season. And then the next season after, you do plant on it, and the soil will be fertile again. And then maybe in that season you leave this one without anything planted on it. So instead of using the soil year after year, you allow it to recover. Also, we have better use of animals. So how can we use these animals to help us in our farming, to help plant seeds, or whether it is to pull them along to help harvest the food. Also, as a result of these new farming techniques, we have more food. Better agricultural production means more food. So more food is always a good thing. We talked about the French Revolution, where people were hungry. And when people are hungry, they are angry. The other thing that hungry people don't do is they don't have a lot of children. And if they do have a lot of children, generally the children die from starvation and disease because they are unhealthy. More people equals healthier people. Healthier people live longer. So as a result of this agricultural revolution, we have this increase in population. And when the population goes up, that can lead to revolution, whether it's the French Revolution, but also we can industrialize. And in order to industrialize a country, and by industrialize I mean build factories, work in factories, not have everyone farm, number one, you need a large population. So this is what caused the French Revolution, and it actually starts in a place called Great Britain. You have to have a large population. You need you need to have people who aren't just farmers, but other people who can actually work in these factories and work in these jobs to make things. Second, you have to have natural resources. You need wood to build the factories. You need coal to power the factories. You need something to power the machines in your factories and your factory as a whole. And if you don't have these natural resources, you have to go out and get them either through conquering places, or you have to buy them from other places, which makes it tough to industrialize. So Great Britain has people, they have resources, and last but not least, they have what is called capital. Capital is just a fancy word to say money. You need people who have the money to invest in these factories, to build these factories, to provide the resources that you need to make these factories and keep these factories running. So capital is a word that just means money, and generally people invest their money into businesses. For example, if you think the company Apple is going to do well, you can take your capital, if you have the money, and invest in that company. And they can then do things and make money off of your money, and you should get money back if they make money. A lot of money there. If you don't know what Great Britain means, I got my fancy little chart here. England, or Great Britain, the island right here of Britain, is generally broken up into Scotland, Wales, and England. All three of these together make up what is called Great Britain. This is also includes the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom also includes this part right here, Northern Ireland, as well as Scotland, England, and Wales. And then there's also a term called the British Isles, which includes Ireland as well as this island right here. a lot of different stuff. But generally when we talk about Great Britain, we mean England, Wales, and Scotland. So kind of three pieces of this island as a whole. So we build these factories. So we have these conditions and then we build these factories. And really the factory conditions are horrible. Most of what they're going to produce is cotton products. So shirts, this is not cotton, but let's pretend it is cotton right here, as well as heavy machines, iron, things that are made out of iron. So we're talking about big machine parts or things that can be used for eventually like railroad tracks or what's eventually going to be used for train cars, heavy machines, big things made out of iron. So that's what these factories are going to produce. If you own the factory, just as if you know someone who owns a business, the goal of any business owner and anyone who invests in that business is to make as much money as possible. So the factory owners want to try and get wealthy off of these factories. They're not trying to get poor. They're not trying to lose all their money. So the goal of these factory owners is to, how can I make as much money as possible producing cotton or producing iron in these factories? And in order to increase their profits, at first, these factories are whether it is a cotton factory or textile or an iron factory, they are mainly hiring men. But these factory owners realize that if they hire women instead of men, they can pay the women half of what they would pay the men. And if you pay women half of what you pay the men, all of that money that you're saving from paying your workers, you make an extra profit off of. So over time, these factory owners fire all the men and then hire women. And then they realize, oh, instead of hiring women, shoot, we can just hire children. And we can pay children half of what we paid women. So children are going to make 1/4 of what men would have made in the factory. And as a result of all of this, the factory owners are getting insanely wealthy while you have unemployed men and women who are relying on their 7-year-old child to work in these factories. So it's not really, it doesn't work out well for this working class people. There's also no safety standards. There's no way to protect yourself. So for example, there's these huge moving parts or moving machines, and these moving machines, today in the 2010s, and we would have a huge button off on the side that you'd push if something happened to stop the machine, a safety standard, a safety feature. We'd have exit signs around the building that would light up in case of a fire. We'd have emergency exits today, right now. Back then, they had none of that. So, for example, a big moving machine, if your hand gets stuck in the machine, there's no way to stop it. So your whole body gets pulled into the machine that's going to crush all your body. Or women with long hair, you lean over the machine. Today, there would be a way to push a button, an emergency stop button. Back then, there wasn't. So your hair gets pulled into this big machine that's moving back and forth, taking care of the cotton, and your hair gets pulled into the machine. And as your hair gets pulled into the machine, you get pulled into the machine and you die. And as a result of these no safety standards, there's a lot of issues, a lot of death. If you have an issue with it and you don't want to work there anymore, they will say, fine, get out, you're fired. There's also low wages. You're going to work 14-hour days, generally from 6 a.m., give or take to 8 p.m., maybe 8:30, with a half-hour break for lunch total. Wages were very low, not a lot of money. By today's standards, the equivalent would be minimal, almost barely enough to survive. No minimum wage yet. We're going to hire children in these factories. Children as young as 4 and 5 are going to work in these factories. Again, you can see down here with bare feet, no safety standards. This would never be allowed in a place today to not wear shoes where there's all these little metal pieces along the ground. Also, we're going to need to mine coal. There's coal in Great Britain. You need coal to power the factories and eventually power the railroads that we're going to, or the rail cars that we're going to invent. So you need to mine the coal. At first, there's going to be men who work in the coal mines, and then they're going to realize that little children can maneuver in the coal mines a little better than men. So they're going to start hiring children in the coal mines. And these children who work in the coal mines, generally they are working 14-hour days, horrible breathing conditions. A lot are going to die from what's called black lung, which eventually becomes known as lung cancer, emphysema. They're going to die of all kinds of different lung issues like pneumonia. And also their growth gets stunted. So people who start working in the factory or in the coal mines at 8 are going to stop growing because of malnutrition and just horrible conditions. And this is really what it looks like in the coal mine. You go down into the mountain to get coal, but there's this little tunnel to get you down to where the coal is. And kids would spend all day pushing coal up the track, going up back to the surface, and then going back down again into the coal mine and digging coal out. This is with their daily. They'd work 6 days a week doing this all the time. Horrible, horrible, horrible conditions. Also, people are going to start moving to the city as a result of this, where the factories are. So we're going to see what's called urbanization, which is the growth of cities. So people are going to start moving from their villages in the countryside to cities and urban areas, which we're going to see this huge growth of cities where people are going to populate these cities. So these conditions in the cities are not very good. We're going to see a lot of overcrowding. So picture down here, people drying their clothes. We have in this picture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a foot down here, 6, and she's holding a cat. 6 children in one bed. This is from New York City. This is from one of what are called the tenements, these apartment buildings, where you're going to have families living in these small, cramped quarters. There are some people who get wealthy off of this, and some people who live in nice areas just outside of like the factory areas. And if you ever go to New York City, whether you go to Brooklyn, if you go up into Harlem, that was where the wealthy people lived back during the Industrial Revolution. And these are called brownstones. These are the places in New York City where the wealthy people, the factory owners, would move to get out of the cramped area, like for example down on the Lower East Side, or down in what's now called Soho or the meatpacking district, these like cramped areas. So they'd move up here. And one kind of side story, the reason why they had these huge steps going up is because you'd park your horse right down here at nighttime to keep it away from the windows, because the horse would obviously go to the bathroom and you didn't want it smelling up your kitchen or your living room or your bedroom. So you keep your horse down here in this area. So a lot of overcrowding, some bad stuff to this, poor factory conditions, poor wages. We'll get into this more in class and talk about some of the inventions that come out. But this is just like the quick overview of some of the stuff that happened. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have a good day. As always, write down your questions. I'll talk to you later. Catch you on the other side.